For the last month, both Jeremy Hunt and Boris Johnson have been touring the country telling the party faithful that they are willing to leave the EU with no deal. Boris Johnson not ruling out suspending Parliament to make that happen. But today, both were faced with an uncomfortable truth. No matter what happens in this leadership race, the numbers in Parliament have not changed. There is no majority for anything. The numbers are not on their side. And today, MPs told them that loud and clear in one vote.
The ayes to the right, 315. The noes to the left, 274.
That's the sound of life becoming a lot trickier for Boris Johnson if he becomes the next Prime Minister. Throughout the leadership race, he's refused to rule out suspending Parliament to force through a no-deal Brexit. MPs today might just have blocked it, thanks to an amendment by this former Tory minister.
If we felt under the weight of any pressure up to now, I would venture to suggest to the House it will be as of nothing in the days leading up to October the 31st. If it is not
the amendment means if the next Prime Minister tries to shut down Parliament, MPs would still be able to return for a debate. Today's session was supposed to be all about Northern Ireland. Instead, it was dominated by Brexit.
What is the outrage today is that this is supposed to be a debate on the Northern Ireland Executive formation, and has now been hijacked and turned into something to do with Brexit and to do with every other issue under the sun except the formation of the Executive, which now looks more unlikely as a result of this piece of legislation.
Whether they wanted the debate or not, this was the government's argument.
Voters will conclude that this is a stitch-up, a clever piece of procedure that pretends to care about democracy.
The government didn't just lose this vote, they lost by a considerable margin. 41 votes, including 17 Tory rebels. One of the rebels was Margot James, who then resigned as Digital Minister. Is this a sign of the battles to come for the next Prime Minister?
Possibly, but I do think that above all it was MPs just simply voting for Parliament to be open as normal in September and October. I think a lot of people watching the news tonight will frankly wonder why on earth we're heading off on our summer holidays given the crisis that Britain's in on Brexit, but frankly keeping us shut for the autumn too was obviously completely untenable, and that's what we voted against tonight.
But for Boris Johnson backers, all this vote has done is make it harder for the next Prime Minister to negotiate a new deal.
If you enter a negotiation, any businessman will tell you, and I'm sure you know, that you don't rule anything out. Doesn't mean you agree with everything that's on the table, but you don't rule anything out. It's because we made it clear that we wouldn't walk away from the table last time we got such a bad deal.
The next occupant here shouldn't just be concerned by the current number of rebels, but also those that may well rebel in future. 4 cabinet ministers abstained from today's vote. One of them was Philip Hammond. He was seen during the vote poking his head out of that door. That's a serving Chancellor abstaining from a government vote, defying a 3-line whip. Under normal circumstances, he and his fellow rebels could expect to be summoned behind that door and fired. What punishment awaited them today? Nothing. Today, a spokesperson for Theresa May said the PM is obviously disappointed, but no doubt her successor will take this into account when forming their government. In a further sign of what the new Prime Minister can expect from a backbench Philip Hammond, he tweeted, "It should not be controversial to believe that Parliament be allowed to sit and have a say during a key period in our country's history." There was another cabinet minister who didn't vote. The other man who wants to run the country missed it in error and was instead getting on with the day job.
Kipper.
Who will face the reality of today's vote, though, is still yet to be decided. Last night, Boris Johnson resorted to kippers to make his case for why he should negotiate Brexit.
He has had his costs massively increased by Brussels bureaucrats who have insisted...
Today, though, the EU pointed out he was wrong. It was all in the detail he'd missed.
The sale of products from food business operator to the final consumer is not covered by the EU legislation on food hygiene.
Boris Johnson hopes that this time next week he'll be living here. Today, though, he got 2 reminders from both Parliament and the EU that neither of them will make the task which lies ahead of him easy.
Paul McNamara reporting. Well, now, earlier I spoke to Margot James, who resigned her ministerial position today after supporting that amendment designed to block the next Prime Minister from suspending Parliament. I began by asking her why she did it?
Well, I think it's starting to feel like we are at the last chance. The leadership will be known on Tuesday next week, and both candidates have set out quite a hard Brexit stall, but I have faith in Jeremy Hunt that he is responsible and that he will do what it takes to get some revisions to a deal. So I felt really that Parliament needed to make its voice heard, and I'm delighted that so many of my colleagues joined me in not opposing the amendments, so that we had a good majority, to show the next Prime Minister, whoever it is, that Parliament needs to be involved right through to the end of this terrible situation in which we find ourselves.
Do you think, therefore, that a no-deal Brexit is now out of the question?
No, I don't think we can say that. We're still in the sort of anything could happen territory, I'm afraid, because you can't forget the legal default. We have an extension until the 31st of October, but if we can't agree a deal by then, and we either don't seek a further extension or aren't granted one, then of course we could end up leaving without a deal at the end of October.
This nexus of 16 Conservative MPs who really represent one of the biggest rebellions the Conservative Party has seen in the House of Commons, is that the beginning of some kind of a movement in the Commons?
Yes, I think it is, because of course I don't think that figure includes all the other Conservative colleagues who abstained on this vote, and they, I think, will be part of a continuing movement in order to make sure that this country leaves with a decent deal, with a decent future relationship with our biggest trading partner. That's our main motivation, and there'll be more than 14 of us intent on pursuing that course.
So you're not in any way considering leaving the party itself?
No, I'm not. I mean, I'm looking to see what can be done within the Conservative Party, and also representing my constituents. My constituents, as you might know, voted to leave by a substantial majority. And I shall be respectful of that.
Have you been able to foresee any way in which Article 50 would be pulled?
I can't really think that, no. I think to revoke would be present a new danger, really, in terms of democracy. The action of actually revoking is a very, very serious step to take. However, we've got to be able to agree a deal, and we can't be held hostage by a relatively small minority of Conservative MPs and opposition MPs indefinitely.
I've also been speaking with Professor Anand Menon, director of the think tank UK in a Changing Europe. I began by asking him if MPs have now ensured that Boris Johnson cannot prorogue Parliament if he becomes Prime Minister.
No, we can't say that. What we can say is that MPs have made it far harder for him to do so, and certainly far harder for him to do so to take us towards a no-deal Brexit, but it is not as yet impossible.
What would the possibility be?
Well, I suppose a new Prime Minister, whoever he may be, may argue that actually, ultimately, the authority when it comes to prorogation is the Queen and not Parliament, and if he decides to prorogue, then so be it. That's a question for the lawyers. But also, of course, what Parliament have done today is given themselves a procedural route to try and block this. We still don't know whether enough Conservative MPs, if it came to a substantive vote, either on a motion or even more so on a vote of no confidence, because it might come to that, would be willing to vote against their own party. It is relatively easy to vote to, if you're going to defy the whip, the easiest way to do so is on a procedural motion such as today. So the procedure is there, but we just don't know what MPs will do if and when it comes to the votes that they will need.
We can say today that 16 rebels appear now to exist and probably won't go out of the game until the game is finished. Would you say that?
Well, I find it problematic to make assumptions about future behaviour given how unpredictable MPs and voting patterns are these days. But I will grant you that what happened today was symbolically absolutely crucial, because you have a number of high-profile serving cabinet ministers abstaining on this. And as a signal to a new Prime Minister, you could hardly think of one that would be more powerful.
So what constitutionally has to happen for anything to be done about the deal or the no deal?
Well, remember, there are two bodies of law we're dealing with here. One is EU law, one is our own law. The default situation in our law is for us to leave on the 31st of October unless Parliament decides on something else. The only person who can ask the European Union for a delay to the 31st of October deadline is the Prime Minister, of course. So Parliament has to find a way to force the Prime Minister to do something that both candidates for the Conservative leadership have explicitly said they do not really want to do. Boris Johnson, of course, has said it far more strongly than Jeremy Hunt.
Is our constitution failing to protect us from some kind of failure in the House of Commons?
I'm still one of those people who thinks that the crisis, for it is a crisis that we face at the moment, is a political rather than constitutional one, simply because it is a crisis of parliamentary numbers rather than anything else. We have a government that doesn't have the numbers to get through the only major priority it faces, which is delivering some sort of Brexit. So it is still conceivable, for instance, that if we had another election, then this process could be finished one way or another and the government could move on to do other things. But what is absolutely true is that over the last 3 years, we've seen precious little governing because government and Parliament have been totally and utterly focused on Brexit to the detriment of everything else.
Professor Menon, thank you very much for talking to us.